consisting of over 16 million blocks, a world so enormous it can house 12 mega empires. I am going to be transforming every empire on the Empires SMP. I have been wanting to start another mega project for quite a while now, and well, I decided, what would it be like if I put my own creative spin on some of the empires from the Empires SMP? And today we're going to be doing that with our first empire. And I'd just like to say beforehand that I am in no way claiming to be improving any of the empires, because everyone on there is already an amazing builder. Anyway, let's start planning. Start with a central spawn island, and then I arrange some other islands around it, and then I divide them up into the separate empires, using reference from Pixelriff's map that he showed in his first episode. Although I would just like to say that not all of the empires that should be next to each other are next to each other, because I tried to arrange them in a way that would look the best on the map. I then use placeholder names because I'm not very good at spelling, and I do end up swapping around the cherry biome and the swamp biome in the end. I then make a second copy of the map, erase the names, and divide it into biomes instead, which will be very helpful when we eventually create the map. With the plan done, I go into World Painter to start creating our map. I add large features like mountains first, and then move on to rivers. I decide to add a large crater over at Fwip space because I think it would be interesting that possibly a gone wrong TNT experiment went wrong there. I also decide to swap around the swamp and the cherry biome because I think it makes more sense for the wetlands to be at the edge of the island. I add a canyon in the mesa, I carve out some final rivers before painting the map and finally adding a volcano on Spawn Island. I'd just like to say that there are two empires that I unfortunately probably won't be featured too much in the videos, and that is Joey and Shubbles, because they joined a little bit late and honestly I didn't plan the map to be able to house them, so I will make sure that they are represented in some way, but unfortunately there really isn't very much room for them to have their own massive empires. So, with the map made, let's get into transforming. We're going to start with the jungle biome, which is the smallest island, and it's still pretty enormous. So in this island we're going to have a ton of trees, the campfire area where they first start, and we're going to have Joey's empire, or the ruins of it, because this island is not big enough at all to accommodate for what I would like to do with his empire. I use World Edit to add a black stone to smooth basalt gradient onto our volcano, which will make the entire island feel like it is made of molten rock. I then go and blend each layer of the gradient into each other, which will just make the transition a little bit less harsh. I then replace every piece of stone in the area with smooth basalt to really drive home the whole volcanic island thing. But public safety warning, don't try this at home. I crashed my PC 5 times just getting to this point. I then build 4 different tree designs of varying sizes, which will form the basis for our jungle. I then put them away for safekeeping until we actually need them to build up the jungle. The next thing I want to tackle is the seating campfire area, where all of the Empire's members meet at the beginning of the series. I start this by using clips from their videos to recreate it exactly how it was before we start the transformation. I begin by transforming the fire pit and adding some smoke on top of it. Then I move on to the chairs, which I arrange around the campfire in the same way that they are in the original design. I also do some on diagonals to make it more of a circle formation. Then I dig down the entire area to make a lovely lake around the main seating area. I make the bottom sand, and then I add some ruins down at the bottom to add interest to this area. I really want it to feel like this area was once a much larger kingdom, and that'll tie into Joey's area later down the line. I fill the pool with water and then very easily carve out a ravine using World Edit. I put a grave down here because this is the same ravine that Joel fell in at the very beginning of the series. I then make a placeholder ruins, which is going to be where Joey's Empire's ruins will eventually stand once the jungle is built up. And now it's finally time to build up the forest. I use a lot of bigger trees to begin with, and then I position all the smaller trees in areas where it's a lot more light than others, so to really make the jungle feel incredibly creepy and mysterious. Next, it's time to add the smoke on top of the volcano. I use the sphere command to build up the smoke in a really nice shape, and I smooth it out at the end to make it better. I then change it all to stained glass, and voila, you have smoke coming out of the volcano. Finally, we're moving on to the ruins. I am actually quite sad that this is all there will be of Joey's Empire, because I think I could have done some good stuff with that. But unfortunately, the map isn't really big enough to fit it in. I do, however, try to have a good go at his throne, making it almost in the same design as the chairs, but grander as though he was the ruler of this area. With all that done, let's go and see how it looks. Before we move on to the next part of the video, well done! You made it this far. You're about 5 minutes in, but you know what that 5 minutes is to me? About 10 hours. So, if you could just take a minute to leave a like on the video and subscribe, it'd really help me out, and you know, I'll get back to spending another 10 hours on this project. The first kingdom we're going to be working on is Smajor's, or Dangthatsalongname. So I really want to illustrate each member's journey over to their kingdoms. So I draw out a long line showing Scott's path from the central spawn over to his kingdom. And then I'm going to go back on it and add a lot of tiny little details that should hopefully really bring this world to life. I add so many little details that I can't really explain them all to you, but if you watch carefully, you should be able to see them. I really think it's details like this that kind of bring the world to another level, where you can explore every little corner of it and find new things. For example, just adding the odd trinket down a little hole like I do here, or even adding where the member has cut down one of the jungle trees like I do here. I also decide to add a little mining area with a nice little hook thing to get down to it. Using the dragon head's top antler things or horn things, you can really make these nice little coal brick bits on the floor, which is really nice. The most complex thing I do here is using a lot of leads to make an almost zipline area across this big ravine part where the river flows. I do this by using invisible animals, and I think it turned out really nicely. It's finally time to take on Scott's Empire. This means cleaning up a ton of the surrounding mountains. It means transforming all of the existing buildings, up to the point where this video was created. And it also means adding a ton more buildings to make it into a massive, thriving empire. I start by recreating all of the buildings that Scott already has in his world, but in this one, so that I can transform them easily, and I'm able to look back at each of their features. I start with the sheep shack because this is the first proper empire building that Scott made. Then I move on to the Great Hall type building, which is Scott's main house. This was a real pain to build all of these shapes, and I've probably got them wrong, but at least they're quite close to the original. Also, I do realise that I got the block palette wrong for the sheep shack, and that's because I was following the image off one of Scott's thumbnails, which is weirdly colour boosted to make it look light blue instead of cyan. It's really interesting how detailed this house is, and I'm a really big fan of the 3 archways at the front of the house, which we're going to keep when we transform it eventually. Although one thing, it is a little bit of a rectangle. I'm definitely going to change that in the final design. I move on to the roof, and I'm a little bit confused by the fact that the warped wart blocks seem to be the wrong colour in the thumbnail before I figure out what's going on. Then, because we're moving in chronological order, I start on the tower. This was horrendous to try and recreate from all of the time lapses and photos that there were. But in the end, I think I got it to a nice place. Probably not exactly on, but at least very close, and I think I did a good job, considering a lot of the images I looked at were from quite far away. Then, finally, I recreate the dome that Scott uses to keep his bees in. This is going to be the final building that I recreate, because if I kept up to date with his videos, I could literally go on forever building every structure he builds. I've got to say, all of the builds stick to a really nice style, and I think they really fit for Scott's Kingdom's overall theme. It's now time to transform all of the lovely buildings that we've just made. So I start with the sheep shack. Now, it was a very blank slate, shall we say, as in it was a very basic building, just a kind of basic, very pretty rectangle, and I decided to go the entire other way. I wanted to make it into a kind of farming complex area, like an entire farm, but in one building. So all the windmills, all the barns, all the farmhouses, all in this one building, and I think it turned out really well. I wanted it to look kind of mad, and I'm actually really happy with it. I'd also just like to say, I do detail a lot of the house more than you see in this time-lapse because of the replay mod and just how fast I need to go for the video to be the right length. But I'd just like to say, I will release a world download once the world is done, if you guys would like that. But only when the world is done, so don't go asking for it. Now, the sheep shack doesn't really have any defining features, so I was able to have a lot of freedom on this build, which was really nice. So I tried to stick to the same roof style, and I also stick to the same beam support structures, especially at the front. I decided to add a couple of windmills, because I think this adds a little bit more height to the build, and just really brings it together. Oh, also, I do a full interior, and I guess once the world download is out, you can explore it for yourself. So now I move on to the tower, which is for the most part just a scaled up version of the original build. But I use these really organic shapes for the antlers, and I have a lot of freedom to do that on this enormous scale. So the lore of this building in my world of the Empires SMP, because the lore isn't the same, is that this building is used to control the dragons that have lived in the mountains of Rivendell for generations. And actually, I do something at the top to represent this, which is 2 dragons eating each other's tails, which, yes, is taken directly from the How to Train Your Dragon books, if you've read them. And these dragons are locked in place by a crystal, and their power is used to control all of the other dragons in the land, making Rivendell really quite a powerful kingdom. So now it's time to tackle Scott's beautiful building, which is the bee building, the dome. And I didn't really know what I wanted it to look like going into it. I just knew I kind of wanted it to have the feel that quite a lot of shopping malls do, which is a very unique look and feel. So I did a lot of messing around and I eventually settled on a large dome surrounded by 4 others on all the sides. Next, I do the flower that sits on top of the build, making it look like a giant pineapple. I also return to this similar shape later on inside the build and for the surrounding towers. I then move on to the 4 surrounding domes, which are basically just a stretched copy of the main one. Then I make these bridges going across to the main dome. These are going to be the only entrances into the main dome, so you have to go through one of the outer towers first, because the inside of the main dome is a perfect climate for the things that are in there, and they cannot escape, and they can't risk the integrity, or all of the kingdom's food supplies will fail. Next, I add a spiral staircase inside the smaller domes, and I do up the floor of them a bit. Moving on to the inside of the building, I make this large flower chandelier thing, and I make a walkway going around it. Next, in between all the pillars that go down to the floor, I make a beehive, which is going to be where the bees live. And then I make the bees, which are so big that they would not fit in the beehive. But we don't question how they fit in there. They just kind of do. I'm sure they shrink down or something. But I'm very happy with the bees. Archibald and Archibald are looking pretty good. Next, it's time to do the most demanding part of this project, which is placing all the buildings where they need to go and tidying up all the cliffs around them. So let's get started on this nightmare of a project by doing the sheep shack first. Next, I start building the landscape around the tower, which I have positioned near the edge of the territory of Rivendell. Now, I use pink concrete powder to build up the mountains because it's a gravity block which gives the mountains a more natural structure. I also use cylinders, so flat layers of pink concrete to fill out and make the mountains smoother and make more sense. And then I set it all to stone and paint it over with grass. Next, I build up the mountain where the main bulk of the city and the palace is going to sit. I modelled this around the palace from the Kingdom of Asgard from the Thor movies, and it has layers on it for the different classes to have a very clear structure to our city. The next thing that I do is I make the palace, and I use lots of the same fancy shapes that are used in the original build, and I do actually put the original build in the roof of the main building, which is pretty much just a scaled up replica of the original. With the palace completed, I know that it's time to move on to the final stage of this mega project. Now, I'm not going to show me putting all of the houses and trees in, because it gets quite awkward with the chunk boundary moving around me in a weird square, and it causes a lot of issues with the replay mod. But I will show the few most notable buildings that I did, which were the church and the manor house. Now let's go and see what we've built. Well, that is all I have got for today, guys. If you did enjoy, please be sure to leave a like on the video and subscribe, because it really helps me out, and I will see you all next time. Goodbye!